Hi, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are in the world. This is Ryan Crodel at Valencell. Thanks for joining us in the webinar today to go over what happened at CES 2019, at least at a high level. And so we'll get started here in another couple of minutes. It looks like we've still got quite a few people logging into the webinar right now. So we'll get started in a few minutes. Thanks for your patience. Hang on just a bit and we'll get going here. Thank you. Okay, it looks like we've leveled off a bit in terms of people logging in, so we will go ahead and get started here. Again, my name is Ryan Crodel with Valencell. Thanks again for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us here today to hear a little bit about what happened at CES 2019. As I think everyone knows, this CES continues to be the largest technology show in the world in terms of the number of attendees. It takes over the Las Vegas Strip and the Convention Center and a lot of other places in Vegas as well. And so what we will do is, in this webinar, is we'll go through some of the key high-level trends that we saw at CES in general, and then also specific to what we spend the most time on in terms of wearables in the consumer sector, as well as in the health and medical sector as well. So we'll dive into some details in those areas towards the end of the webinar here. But before we dive in, a few quick housekeeping items. One of the questions we always get is, will we make the slides and the recording available for people who couldn't make it? And yes, as we always do, we'll make the slides and the recording of the webinar available usually within about 24 hours after the webinar is done. So we will certainly do that again with this one. And secondly, if you do have questions at any point throughout the webinar, please do submit those through the GoToWebinar interface, and I'll take those questions as they come up and address whatever topic is relevant at that point. And so with that, I will go ahead and dive in and get started here, but please do submit questions as they come up. I like to keep these as interactive as possible. So CES was once again extremely crowded with, I don't know, 170 or so thousand people, at least as the numbers were reported. It was interesting. Most of what we noticed was that, in terms of the attendance, was that the overall volume of attendance was down a bit, but that the quality of attendee in terms of the function and the companies represented were of higher quality than we've seen in years past. And so, and that has continued over the last few years, and it was good to see that continue to elevate the quality of conversations and discussions that we've had at CES, and certainly continues to be a big event for Valencell and really the whole wearables ecosystem, which I'll talk a bit more about as we go along here. But before we dive into those details, I wanted to cover a few of the more high level themes of the event. And voice assistance was once again a big piece of the show as a whole, and really came through in really every different type of device and form factor and appliance or TV, whatever it might be. Particularly Amazon, Google, and to a certain extent Apple are really deploying these voice assistants in all different kinds of devices. You saw the Alexa and Google logos in particular spread across the entire show, whether it was in a car or a refrigerator or a wearable device or you name it. There are certainly voice assistants everywhere now. There is still a lot of uncertainty, I think, in terms of how all of this gets tied together. So if your microwave and your refrigerator and your oven and your watch and your TV can all respond to a voice assistant command, how do you know which one to talk to, or how do those devices know which one you are talking to? And so there's still some, not just some, there's still a lot of coordination and integration that needs to go on to make this, to make these voice assistants truly valuable in a cohesive way that makes sense for a pretty broad range of use cases. And so right now we're in this land grab of deploying these voice assistants into as many different devices and places as possible. And then what you're starting to see on the sort of behind the scenes is how do you make all this work together seamlessly in a way that makes sense for the intended use case or use cases. And you're starting to see a lot of work done behind the scenes around that, but there's still a lot of work to be done in that area to really have this come to fruition in a valuable way. So you will notice throughout the next few slides that the voice assistants are showing up in a variety of different places, one of them being in TVs, of course, to be able to turn up and turn down the volume, change channels, whatever it might be. And the TV makers are in an interesting place because if you think about just a few years ago, 3D TVs were a big thing, or the big thing at CES, and then those disappeared when the content didn't back it up, and frankly the user experience with the 3D TVs was less than stellar, at least in my personal opinion. And then more recently, last year, and if not the year before, was all about curved TVs, and those were going to be the next big thing in TVs, and those effectively disappeared as of this year. You saw very few curved TVs. That's not to say curved screens, as you see some of the images here. Curved screens were certainly a big talking point at CES from the television makers, and so applying these types of screens to different surfaces that may or may not be curved. Or one of the big announcements, I think LG was one of them, and if not others, had these TVs that rolled up out of a box. This one you see here on the bottom left is that box below it is essentially a container, and the TV rolls up out of the box, similar to the way a projection screen rolls down out of a container or out of a roll. Except this is high quality, high def LED or QLED screens that provide the very high level video and visual experiences, but can roll up or roll down to get out of the way. Just in general, I think the TV manufacturers are trying to find. So it remains to be seen as to whether these rolling TVs are going to be valuable for consumers in a way that actually helps the TVs gain a lot of traction in the marketplace. Now, with that said, I think that the technology behind it, in terms of making that screen flexible and still maintain high degrees of accuracy and clarity in the visual experience, you're starting to see that deployed in mobile phones and in a lot of other areas that can certainly provide additional value. I think in general, the TV manufacturers are trying to find a way or ways to become more than just a projection screen or a bigger screen for content coming from your phone. And they certainly have their work cut out for them in that regard. But they're trying to find ways to differentiate themselves and add additional value beyond being just a larger piece of glass to show whatever's on your phone or your mobile device. We'll see if they can actually do that. CES, as has been the case in years past, was a large auto show unto itself. And obviously autonomous driving and autonomous vehicles in general, it continued to be at the forefront of the automotive section of CES. And even outside of CES, you could take an Uber or a Lyft driven by an autonomous vehicle in Las Vegas during the show. And so they were actually doing testing of those vehicles in Las Vegas during the show, which had to present a pretty difficult working environment for those autonomous vehicles, given the number of people and the number of vehicles in the area at the time. So I'm sure that was a pretty good test bed for them. But as you can see, also the voice assistants are starting to make a bigger push into automotive as well, particularly Amazon with Alexa. Google was certainly embedding the Google Assistant into automotive as well. They obviously have the Android Auto or Android for Auto. I can't remember exactly what it's called. Those at this point are two separate things, but I'm sure you'll see those converge very quickly. So another big area, particularly in the Sands Expo, where we were and where Valencell had a booth and a presence, is smart home. So getting back to that theme of from what I talked about with the voice assistants, there's a similar thing going on in terms of the smart home, where every imaginable thing in your house, appliance, doorbell, washing machine, toilet, everything you can imagine is being connected now, for better or worse. And again, there's quite a bit of integration work that still is lacking in terms of making all of these things work together and work together in a way that makes sense. So your doorbell and your washing machine and your TV all can be controlled by a single interface or single system in order for that more seamless user experience to actually come to fruition. So everything's connected already, if it hasn't already been. But then making it all work together is still quite a challenge in terms of not just the user interface. So is it a screen? Is it a voice? Is it your phone, or is it some other mechanism for controlling all of these devices? And most of them have a variety of different ways to control them. So there's still some shaking out to do in terms of how that user experience comes together. And part of the challenge, of course, is that some of these companies make some portion of the smart home devices, but they don't make another portion, or they don't make the system to tie it all together, or they've got a piece or pieces, but not the complete system to pull it all together. So I think you'll see starting to emerge that what effectively is integration middleware between all of these devices to provide a consistent user experience for all of these different smart home devices. Robots have been a keystone of CES for many years now. So not surprising that they were still there. And in years past, particularly 5-10 years ago, they're very much a technology looking for a solution. What was interesting to me, particularly as it relates to robots, was that you're starting to see, and whether you call this a robot or not, you're starting to see practical applications of robotics, certainly robotics technology, if not outright robots themselves, in things like this wheelchair that then helps people stand up and provides additional functionality, additional capability to the individual who's using it. And so whether it's this particular application of that technology or others, you're starting to see these the robots and the robotics technology being applied in ways that help augment the individual's day-to-day life, or helping them overcome challenges that they may be facing on a day-to-day basis. So then digital health was a major theme at the show once again this year, and it really came through loud and clear, this whole convergence of consumer wearables and health and medical devices and applications continuing. So we at Valencell have seen this going on for several years now, and as an ingredient technology company, we sit in a sort of unique perspective in the marketplace to be able to see some of these devices and projects starting off years in advance of them actually hitting the market. And so what you're starting to see now is that certainly the consumerization of health and medical devices and the way people approach their healthcare and just overall their approach to health and medical wellness is certainly something that was at the forefront at CES. And that's representative in the Digital Health Summit, which is a full 2-day conference within a conference, if you will, at CES, that covered everything from sleep technology to aging and mental health and artificial intelligence overlaid or underneath a lot of, if not every one of these different solutions and products that are coming to market. Certainly this consumerization, or I think what they were referring to as a retail revolution in healthcare, with consumers being empowered to take control of their health. Consumers certainly are generating an enormous amount of health data about themselves, whether that's coming from a wearable device or a connected blood pressure cuff or connected glucose monitor, or a variety of different other devices that are now feeding data into a database somewhere. Consumers have an unprecedented level of control over how they approach their health, and overall how they live their life, and how that impacts their health and longevity. Smart homes and voice assistant technology are certainly being applied in this realm as well, particularly for assisted living facilities and seniors aging in place, I think is the term they use for enabling people who might otherwise have had to go into an assisted living facility or a healthcare facility of some kind, are able to live longer and healthier in their own homes. Certainly a trend toward life science and pharma companies getting more involved in using digital health technology, whether that's wearable devices or digital therapeutics or some combination thereof, using those types of solutions in combination with pharmacotherapies. There's certainly a lot of activity going on in that realm, where life science and pharma companies are concerned. And then I mentioned digital therapeutics a bit. You're starting to see now these digital therapeutics getting FDA approval and in the marketplace, and I think you'll see that accelerate certainly this year and in the next few years going forward. One of the big topics that was certainly important to us at Valencell, but also saw several other announcements around cuffless blood pressure. So we had a demonstration of our cuffless blood pressure technology in the booth. As you can see there, a picture of a demonstration of that technology going on. But several other companies also had cuffless blood pressure technology in demonstration at CES. Omron's smartwatch blood pressure monitor, which has also been cleared by the FDA, launched in January, and I had a chance to see that device in action. It's very impressive, and has I think a lot of opportunity and a lot of use cases in front of it that will be very interesting to watch that play out. Another company had a washable blood pressure monitoring shirt. I didn't actually see this one in person. I just saw the announcement, and so I don't know how well that works, or what kind of data they have supporting the accuracy of those blood pressure measurements with that shirt. But it is another example of the focus around blood pressure, and not surprisingly, given the high numbers of hypertension and high blood pressure that is all too common these days, unfortunately. It looks like, oh, yep, there looks like we did have a question come in. Wasn't the Omron monitor basically a wrist cuff? Yeah, you're right about that. So you could describe that, or maybe it's not entirely accurate to call that cuffless blood pressure, because you're right. That device does use the same methodology, same auscultatory methodology of the cuff. It's just shrunk down into a device that can work on the wrist, and so there's some nuance to that as well. They recommend you hold your wrist at heart level in the same way you would with a blood pressure cuff as well. But what I saw was that that technology worked extremely well. So that is a good point. Thanks for pointing that out. That is, I guess technically it is a cuff, but impressive technology nonetheless. It looks. Oh, we had another question come in, but it just about will the slides be available after the webinar? And yes, they will be available after the webinar. So please keep the questions coming. I like to keep this as interactive as possible, so we appreciate those coming in. A few things specifically about wearables. So interestingly, this year there were very few product announcements in the wearable space. Garmin did have introduced their first LTE-enabled smartwatch, and Withings, following on the Apple Watch, announced a new product that was a wearable fitness tracker watch that now also does ECG readings. And so that was announced. Matrix, which is a small company that does a device that they call the Power Watch, which uses body heat to power the watch. I believe they added solar power capabilities in addition to the body heat powering, which they claim that device would never need charging. Whether that's true or not, that's hard to say. And then we had a few other launches from companies like Seoul Electronics, and TicWatch, I think, announced a couple of other devices as well. But overall, relatively small number of wearables new product announcements at the show. And I think that's representative of the fact that there's a lot of behind the scenes work going on in next generation product development, but also next generation capabilities with those devices. And that combined with the fact that it is, for a wearables company, it is very easy to get lost in the noise of CES when you have major consumer electronics and appliance brands and automotive brands and you name it launching new products. It is hard to get the attention within all of that noise that a lot of these companies want for good reason. And so you're starting to see more and more of these wearables companies launching products either before or after CES, and not trying to cut through all of that noise when you don't have to at CES. So one of the other areas that we saw a great deal of traction is around hearables and augmented hearing. So we've talked about this before, but for those of you who may not have heard this, that what's going on at the ear right now is a really good microcosm of this whole convergence of consumer wearables, consumer electronics, and health and medical devices. So you're starting to see a lot of the consumer hearables companies, the earbud and headphones companies, coming into more of the hearing augmentation capabilities and adding new capabilities that in some ways overlap with the traditional hearing health and hearing augmentation markets. And likewise, you're starting to see the hearing health and hearing aid companies adding new capabilities, and this is probably a good transition into the next slide. Hearing aid companies adding new capabilities that have traditionally been defined as in the wearables category or the fitness tracker category. The Starkey device that was launched at CES, the next version of the Livio, what they call the Livio AI, has an accelerometer as well as Valencell's heart rate monitoring technology, so they can do with that with that hearing aid, in addition to all of the advanced hearing augmentation and hearing health capabilities the device has, it also does fall detection and alerting, heart rate measurement, and has integration to virtual assistants. So what we're seeing here is, and also Resound launches the one of their products around AI voice control, using not only the standard standard voice assistant capabilities, but also being able to control different capabilities of the hearing aid itself through voice control. And then, of course, Valencell and our key partner Sunyan demonstrated the first ever hearing aid receiver in canal with an embedded biometric sensor. So the sensor is actually in the ear canal, in the portion of the hearing aid known as the receiver in canal. So we had that available for demonstration at CES as well. Along those lines, our co-founder and president, Dr. Stephen LaBeouf, spoke at the Digital Health Summit and spoke on this topic of hearables and this era of smart and augmented hearing, and then did a follow-up interview as well in the Digital Health Live studio. I've provided this with links to those videos if you are interested in hearing more about what was covered in either one of those. I won't spend a whole lot of time on it here, but if you want to check those out, by all means, the links are here, and they will be included in the slides that we send around as well, so you can click on those there. Looks like we got a couple more questions that have come in. First one is the Starkey device a new device from a hardware standpoint, or is it the same one from last year with a software update? This is it is a next version of the device. If I understand this correctly, this is anyone from Starkey who may be on can correct me if I mistake this, but I believe it is the next version or next generation of the device that was launched last year, just adding the heart rate monitoring capabilities, because the one they launched, I think it was 2 or 3 months ago in the October-November timeframe, had the fall detection capabilities. So that is that. And then the next question is, what biosignals can the in-ear biosensor capture? So that sensor can capture everything that we can do in the same sensor modules that we put into consumer wearables. So heart rate variability, or the RR interval, the time between beats of the heart. And then we can also do things like cardiac efficiency, or essentially a heart rate over step rate proxy for cardiovascular fitness levels. And then we can, of course, do all of the accelerometry-based metrics like activity count, or activity indication, step count, total steps, calorie burn, that kind of thing. And one of the things we mentioned earlier was the blood pressure technology. Long term, we certainly want those sensors in the hearing aids to incorporate our blood pressure technology as well. And we're certainly working towards that path. Another question that has come in regards to the inertial sensors, what areas do you see the need going beyond accelerometers, i.e. gyro or gyroscope integration? That is a really good question. I think it depends on what use cases beyond fall detection are required. So right now, most of the companies believe they can do fall detection with just the accelerometer, and so I wouldn't think you would see a need for a gyro for that. But if there are more, where I would see it coming in is in something more along the lines of activity recognition, and trying to identify what a person is doing in a given situation, and adjusting the capabilities of the device as a way to incorporate that inertial motion in providing a better user experience. So let me give you an example. Most of these devices now can do directional hearing or 360 hearing, but there's a challenge in identifying when the situation when directional hearing, meaning, and when I say directional hearing, I mean when you're looking at someone and having a conversation, you want to hear what they're saying and not all of the ambient noise around you. And so being able to do directional hearing, but then when you're walking down the street, for example, then you want the 360 hearing because you want that ambient noise to be able to understand what's going on around you. So there's a lot of potential for inertial sensors to be able to understand exactly what a person is doing at a given time and adjust the hearing augmentation accordingly, just as an example. Some other questions that have come in, I guess I touched on a hot topic here. Is there a need for a much more accurate accelerometer for current market needs? At this point, I don't see it for the current use cases that are in the market now and planned for the immediate future. Particularly when you consider a 6-axis accelerometer, not just a 3-axis accelerometer. Like I said, that could certainly change as you want to add new capabilities to the device, and I think you'll start to see that, but it's not something in detail, at least, that we can comment on. And then next question is, what's the impact of the overall size of the receiver relative to a standard receiver? So that's the great thing about the receiver in canal with the biometric sensor that we've been able to develop with Sunyan. That receiver in canal is effectively the same size as existing rigs. So there's very little impact on the overall size. I don't have the specific numbers off the top of my head, but I believe it is the exact same form factor, if not slightly larger, for adding the biometric sensor capabilities. Oh, I see. The next question is a follow-up to the previous question about accelerometer, or a need for a more accurate accelerometer. And then let's see. Next question was, aside from consumer medical and endpoint devices, what did you observe at CES in regard to integrating mobile biotech into enterprise class platforms for populations like EHR, EMR, etc.? Great question, and there's at least on the floor and in terms of product announcements or program announcements, I would say there was very little. Now, with that said, this is one of the areas that falls into a lot of the behind the scenes work and behind the scenes integration discussions that are going on. Most of if not all of the major EMR, EHR vendors were at CES, mostly just walking the floor, talking to people, doing meetings. But there's certainly activity going on in that realm. Not much that I can talk about specifically at the moment. But then the big data and security and biointerfacing areas are certainly of topics of interest. Again, it's not something that you see at the forefront, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of discussion, particularly around big data and security, as you start gathering more and more data from more and more endpoints. The opportunity and the interest in getting at that data only increases. And so there's certainly a recognition that as this data becomes more and more consolidated and more insightful, it presents a bigger challenge from a security standpoint and becomes more important from a security standpoint. So there are a lot of discussions, a lot of activity, but frankly, not much to report on in terms of functional products or solutions or systems in place. Next question is, do you think PPG sensors will be mainstream in hearing aids or for premium models? That's a good question, and probably a better question for the hearing aid companies themselves. I can't speak to exactly what their rollout plans would look like, but I would think that like a lot of new capabilities, they will launch it in a few of their models and then eventually roll it out to the full mainstream product lines. But again, I don't have any specific information on that. Does the biometric sensor need to be, sorry, we're on to the next question. Does the biometric sensor need to be placed inside the ear canal, or is it possible to place the sensor also in the area around the ear, around ear on the skull? Yeah, good question. In fact, so the answer is it can be either. In fact, most of the implementations of Valencell's biometric sensor technology in ear-based devices have been in consumer wearables or consumer hearables, and actually in those the sensor sits at the bottom of the concha and the bottom of the ear bowl there, where you can get an extremely clean signal off of the ear with a good earbud design. We're also now what you'll see is we also have tested and validated and are working with customers on integrating the sensors into over-the-ear hearable devices or wearable devices as well, depending on the form factor. So yeah, actually, the forehead is another great place to measure biometrics. So there's a lot of flexibility in terms of the sensor location around the head. So it definitely does not have to be in the ear canal. It can now, and we've shown that it can work well inside the ear canal. But there's a lot of other places around the head that work well from a biometric standpoint. Another question: does the new receiver leverage an optical sensor, and if so, how do you account for the challenges of earwax, hair, etc.? So yes, the new receiver in canal with a biometric sensor is an optical PPG sensor, and PPG only. There's no other sensor modality in those RICs. And how do you account for challenges that with earwax and other blockages for the optical signal? That presents a significant challenge, and the how we go about accounting for those challenges is not something we disclose publicly, other than saying that we have overcome those challenges and have a design that works well despite those obstacles. So thanks for all the questions. I think that's all that's come in at the moment. Please do keep them coming, and happy to answer more as they come up. Let's see, where were we? So the links to the videos and the presentations, if you want to see them, you'll have those with the slides after we share those. Next area was AR and VR. This is an area where I think this first quote really sums it up well, as small but meaningful steps forward, where you're starting to see both AR and VR being the hype cycle is starting to come down a bit, if you will, and you're starting to see more practical applications for AR and VR technologies being applied and deployed. So what we talked about last year and again this year was using VR in the health and medical environment for things like pain management. But you're also starting to see applications of VR specifically in physician training and in patient treatment protocols, in helping different types of health conditions and medical conditions as part of an overall therapy for patients with using VR applications. And same with AR. Most of what we've seen is in the enterprise and industrial area, where using AR in particular as a visual overlay for things like repair workers in the field, or identifying certain situations that could they can help accelerate the solution to enterprise or industrial safety situations where an individual may be in a dangerous or in a high stress environment. They can use inputs from the AR device and also biometric sensors to be able to identify when they need to change that environment or take evasive action of some kind. So, one of the examples, I think we talked about this last year, and certainly starting to see more applications for VR in the health and medical sector, like I mentioned before. And I think the next step that you'll see is integrating, at least in this realm, is integrating the biometric sensors directly into the VR head-mounted devices. Right now, it requires a third device in addition to the head-mounted device and or the headphones. I think you'll start to see those biometrics and other sensors embedded directly into the head-mounted devices for enhanced user experiences for use cases like this. Looks like we had another question come in. So did the Valencell team see any interesting new implementations of embedded biosensors within sport tech or military/law applications, i.e. injury prevention and recovery and incident response? Yeah, so excuse me. So on the sport technology, I would say where you're starting to see more new and interesting implementations, not necessarily implementations of the technology, but it's more on the data side of things and the analytics of processing the data coming off of these sensors in areas around injury prevention and recovery. You hit the nail on the head there. It's and particularly as it relates to using heart rate variability in identifying when a particular athlete or when a person is overtrained or undertrained, or have they gotten enough recovery, or you're starting to see the use case has been around for quite a while, but you're starting to see that getting deployed into more and more devices and more use cases. And I think overall the average consumer is starting to understand more about how they're looking at those more longitudinal trends in things like heart rate variability to understand how their body's responding to whatever they're putting it through. And so you're starting to see a lot more analytics and a lot more what I would say valuable presentation of that data in a way that's more easily consumable by the average consumer who may not understand the the nuts and bolts of the technology and how that information is created. On the military and first responder side of things, we are starting to see, particularly on the military side of things, an increased interest in adding biosensors to different portions or different types of military and soldiers' equipment. So one of the projects that we did years ago was embedding our biometric sensors into the radio earbuds that soldiers and first responders use in the field, and that was frankly it saw good traction in certain areas, but in others didn't see much traction, and so but now you're starting to see different areas of the military and different use cases for that biometric sensor technology and things like helmets and into clothing and materials. And overall, I think you're starting to see that the Defense Department and military organizations in general deploying more of this technology in a way that it gives them more real-time visibility into how the soldiers and the first responders are, how their vital signs are changing according to their particular environment, and again, being able to take evasive action when there is a problem or the early indications of a problem being identified. Another question, it looks like come in. What do you think is the largest challenge in the adoption of AR devices in various industries? Good question. I think there's a lot of challenges with AR, but I think what the advantage AR has is that you can relatively easily provide a valuable overlay to what someone is actually seeing in different use cases. The biggest challenge is like finding the right use cases where it makes most sense today with the current state of the technology. And so things like a repair worker in the field who's trying to repair an HVAC system or an air conditioning system, an overlay for those types of scenarios can be really valuable today with existing technology. And so I think you're going to start to see, similar to the way biometric sensors and biometric sensors in wearables are starting to get deployed more and more in specific health and medical use cases. Finding the right use cases where it makes most sense today is the biggest challenge, but also the biggest near-term opportunity. And similarly, people think of or talk about wearables as almost as if it's a homogeneous category of devices, and that's how this is actually playing out is that there's different devices designed for very specific use cases, and I think you're going to see the same thing in AR and also VR applications, where the initial use cases are very targeted and can provide specific value in a relatively small segment of the market, but then you add up those different small segments of the market and it adds up to a large number. So still very early days, I would say, with both AR and VR, but you're starting to see those specific applications being deployed that solve an immediate problem and aren't just technology overlaid for technology's sake. So it looks like that's the end of the questions for now. Keep them coming. This is great. We wanted to highlight a couple of things that Valencell announced here. at CES. One is the new sensor modules that we have available, both for earbuds or ear-based devices, beyond just the biometric sensors in the hearing aid receiver and canal, and then also for wearables. We now have a range of different sensor modules that can not only provide highly accurate biometric sensor data, but then also provide different kinds of data. For example, we now have a multi-wavelength sensor module that can be applied for out of the box for things like measuring SpO2 or blood oxygenation in different devices. And then we also use CES as a way to showcase the wide range of different user experiences and different devices that the sensor modules are being built into. And we've covered quite a few of those here, so I won't dive into this in too much detail, but trying to address that perception of that still exists in the marketplace, that wearables are just smartwatches and fitness bands, and that's certainly not the case, and particularly the underlying technology that's going into a lot of these devices is getting deployed in a broad range of different devices and industries and form factors, and so we try to kind of bring that to the forefront there at CES. And hopefully we will see you next year at CES. If you're planning on being there, please do let us know. We'd love to have you stop by the booth or meet with us in some way. Just let us know. I know we've been doing quite a bit of Q&A so far, and this has been great to do this as we go along here. It looks like there are a few other questions that have come in, but and I'm happy to take those right now as we go along. If you do have any other questions, submit them through the interface, and I will take them in order here. So next one I see is smart clothing too early for health monitoring? You know, that I wouldn't say it's too early for health monitoring per se. I think the smart clothing still has the challenge of longevity and durability. So most people want to wash the clothes they wear, and most of the technology that we have seen for smart clothing still has some challenges as it relates to the durability of the embedded technology into those into smart clothing. Unless you can actually remove the sensor technology before washing the clothes, it's still very challenging to provide that level of durability and maintain high degrees of accuracy for health monitoring. And so there's still work to be done there, and I know there's a lot of companies out there are working on it, so I'm sure we'll see some advancements soon. But I would say right now those challenges still exist. Next question was around any innovations around power management and batteries. A great question, and a really important topic for wearables in particular, but I think for consumer electronics and devices along those lines as a whole. Unfortunately, not much to report on that front. We still don't see, at least from technologies that can be commercialized at scale and have a broad impact, we have not seen any major breakthrough innovations coming through. Most of what we see is still what we would consider incremental innovations in that area to be able to eke out additional battery life. Now, what you are seeing, particularly as it relates to the sensor modalities and sensor technologies, is that the sensor technologies across the board, not just in PPG sensors like Valencells, but across the board, you're seeing significant improvements in the sensor technology power budgets and power requirements, and then also the power budgets of the processors themselves. There's a big reason why we did the partnership with this company Ambic, who does very low power processors, and we've seen significant improvements in our power requirements just for our PPG sensors, and that certainly applies to other sensor modalities and other requirements for the overall system budget, power budget, I should say, for different devices. So unfortunately, no breakthroughs, but other ways of addressing longer battery life, or I would say making incremental improvements. A couple other questions looks like here. A few people saying thanks for all the info. That's great. I really appreciate that. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the webinar. Really appreciate it, and appreciate the thanks. Glad it's been valuable for you. Had another question about the process of getting Valencell sensor modules. Our sensor technology specifically, yeah, you can email us directly, or email me directly, or so there's my email address. You can also email info@valencell.com, and happy to help you with whatever project or whatever device you're working on. Let's see. Next question is, can you introduce a development toolkit for the sensor modules, like price info? Any promotion plan coming for the kit? I'm not sure I fully understand the question. I will say we do have development or evaluation kits for our technology specifically that include a wireless demonstration system, either a wristband or a set of earbuds, along with one of our sensor modules and a development board that you can plug into a computer and start writing to our API. So those are available today. Again, I would say email me directly, or email info@valencell.com, and we're happy to help you get one of those. And a couple more thanks. So very much appreciate that. And just a couple of comments. It looks like on the power, the mini power cell and hearing aid was pretty cool from Widex and Evoke. Yeah, so that I should have mentioned that, and thank you for bringing that to the mini fuel cell in hearing aids that Widex and a company called Evoke announced at CES. That's a great point. I haven't seen that technology in action directly, but that is a potentially compelling new technology that is both from a size and a power budget standpoint could be really interesting. So great point. Thanks for bringing that up. And for those of you who don't know what I was referring to, a hearing aid company called Widex and one of their partners, a battery company called Evoke, announced what they're referring to as a mini fuel cell battery for hearing aids that, at least on paper, looks like it will significantly improve battery life and the overall power budget for something as small as a hearing aid. And there's other obvious applications for that. So that will be a very interesting one to watch. Unclear to me as to the different, I should say the flexibility in deployment around form factor and environments that technology would be applicable in. So that's something else to look at, but that's a great point. So thanks for bringing that up, and thanks everyone for taking the time to join the webinar today. It looks like we are a few minutes over, and I don't see any other questions come in, but if you think of other questions, feel free to email me directly. I'm happy to answer those after the webinar here. But thanks again. We'll send out the links to the recording and to the slides. Please share those with anyone who you think might be interested, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.